It is a big pleasure to welcome you to a presentation by Dejha and Ania Catherine, who is here to talk about a very special project called On View, which is currently on show at SCAD Museum of Art in Savannah, Georgia. My name is Janse van Rensburg. I am a head curator for SCAD exhibitions and was also the commissioning curator for the project. It's been a wonderful and incredible project to bring to fruition. It's also the first one of its kind for our museum. And it's kind of like a very important moment for us to also kind of reflect and think about what the impact is of the digital realities in our digital lives and lived moments. And so really amazing moment to sit here with two exceptional human beings. Ania Catherine is, hold on a second, let me just open this up. She's an artist and choreographer based in LA, California, and her work merges movement, film and performance art, and has been shown internationally in numerous contexts. She holds a master's degree from the London School of Economics, and through the use of human bodies, explores the intersections of gender, sexuality, representation, and politics. And in addition to a personal practice, she works internationally performing, choreographing, speaking, directing, and teaching. And Dejha is a Los Angeles-based immersive experience designer with no allegiance to any single medium. Her work is human-centric, integrating environments, bodies, and creative technology. She speaks from senses to senses, enveloping the audience participant not only in the physical environment, but also emotionally, psychologically, and in her imaginary. She has developed experiences with partners like Adidas, BET, Hulu, Lakma Art Basel, Pepsi, Things, and WeWork. Dejha and Ania works collaboratively. They're also a couple, and I think there's also a very important aspect of their practice that is about collaboration. In the context of the project at the museum, they also collaborated with various individuals and also with SCAD students from performing arts, from design, and film and television to realize a project that I think has been incredibly fruitful, not only in terms of its impact, but also in terms of its opportunities for education. They will talk more detailed about the project. We will have a Q&A afterwards that I also would like to participate in, but because I think it's also very important for us to understand what this kind of work means institutionally and some of the things that needs to be navigated from also how traditional museum environments work and then going into complex and beautiful projects like On View and how it kind of addresses kind of issues of our time.
We wanted to give a little background, and we'll try to make it as concise as possible, but it's really a very layered cultural context that we are making this piece in. And we were responding to several factors. Number one was just noticing the way that people interact with our work. So whether we make something that's meant to just be looked at or not, we found audience members wanting to be inside the work, using the work as a place to take photos instead of something to look at or engage with in a more traditional fashion. Another thing was it's the first time we made anything in a museum context, so we wanted to make something that really was at its maximum strength conceptually in a museum setting. So not something that would be in a festival or part of a VIP party for an art event or something like that, something specifically that was for a museum audience. And lastly, it was a self-reflexive work because we both work in kind of commercial context. We get commissioned by brands to make activations in the experiential realm, but also we are artists and purists first and foremost, but we're kind of straddling the line. We're feeding that kind of work, which is adjusting and really altering how people are engaging with our artwork. So we're kind of in between two worlds and trying to navigate and grapple with what that means and how we can do that with integrity and then also survive financially. So.
As Ania was saying, we have both creating in both commercial contexts as well as cultural institutions and art institutions. We've been looking a lot and studying a lot of the choreography of viewing art, whether it be the art that we've been creating or the art that we see others creating. And we've seen this sort of, evolution, where, one is looking at the art, one is photographing the art, one is getting their photo taken in front of the art, one is turning their back to the art altogether. Art is seeing a lot of backs these days, and taking their photo within it. Or we might say, hey, have you seen, the new exhibit at Tate Modern?
And I'm like, yeah, but I haven't been to London, but I've seen it online. So it's like, did you see
Scrolling
the work?
through the art.
Yeah.
And now with Airbnb experiences, you can sleep next to the Mona Lisa.
Which is the newest form of engaging with art.
Yeah. So, as we talk about On View, we're going to talk a lot about the choreography of how we view art. So our current experience, so on your left, this is the Mona Lisa at the Louvre. And on the right is a piece that Ania and I created. This was a commission by Adidas, actually how Storm found us. Yeah, on an Instagram story. So this is a work of art, this piece called Offazon. It was commissioned by Adidas. However, the choreography between the two, they look very similar of how people are experiencing this, but the one on the left is, viewing art, just viewing art, and the one on the right is viewing art with, I think, Adidas's hope that you would also buy some shoes, and the art might help you do that. So that's interesting. And we talk about, like, why is art being used, in this kind of way? And, we've been exposed a lot to agency worlds, trying to, almost I want to say, like, co-opt art, or the rich history of performance and installation art as a means to create engagement, as a means to have people take photographs within an artwork so that they can then distribute it online and tag a brand. And then that way they can build something like what we call data bodies, which we'll talk a little bit about later, which is how companies collect, like Google, Amazon, et cetera, collect information about us and build data profiles on us based on how we interact with the internet. If I click on something, I buy on something, my geotagging, all of this says a lot about who I am, and it says a lot about what my habits are, and a company might know what I can do in the future, maybe better than I know myself. That's the hope with the data body, to allow for more targeting, better targeting, more dollars, and then now we know even more how to engage you, and then the cycle kind of viciously continues.
And art is engaging.
Yeah.
So here we see Kusama in 1965, and then currently her work being very popularly used as a selfie stage. So we have to ask basically what the intention was behind it, and then now how this kind of work is gaining in popularity, and why work where the audience member can become the subject of the art is becoming more and more popular. And you see hours of lines for people to go see pieces that are really catering or allow them to be the subject of the artwork they're going to see, and very small lines for pieces that don't have as good of an opportunity as something like this for you to have your photo taken. And then this is just very recently, fine art is also engaging with selfie culture in a very deliberate way, where you have at Hudson Yards Snark Park. It opened, I think, this month. And we were saying you can get shoes at Balenciaga and a watch at Cartier and then a designer selfie at Snark Park, all in the same complex. So you pay $28.
So like a fine artist, this is no longer an agency co-opting art, but a fine artist, an art world darling, bringing their art into this place. Yeah.
So this is very interesting.
And just to kind of I think neatly pack it up, you want to talk about Susan?
I do. I always want to talk about Susan Sontag.
Susan Sontag.
So on photography, Susan Sontag talks about the relationship between images and capitalism. So a capitalist society requires a culture based on images. Cameras define reality in two ways that are essential to the working of an advanced industrial society: as a spectacle for the masses and an object of surveillance for rulers. And this obviously was something she was observing, and this was in 1977. But now looking at the way that images and social media are becoming a spectacle for the masses and also a mechanism for surveillance by companies, this feels more relevant than ever.
So kind of taking this lead also from Susan about how images are tied to capitalist sort of motivation and also why they are so important. I think, we were asking two central questions that are related to that, which is, On View is asking, are you going to see what's on view? Are you going to see yourself on view? And that ties back to the choreography that we were talking about earlier.
Now to the piece.
Yeah, let's enter into the piece after that background. But this is the ground plan of On View and the experimental gallery at the SCAD Museum of Art. On View works in 3 phases. And over on your right, I keep getting that switched, is the terms and condition. That is the first space, and we'll go into detail of every space. And then you enter into the stages gallery second, and then at the end, you're at the golden gallery. Let's just dive right in, and just so you can get a spatial kind of layout. This space is like 20 by, I think, 40 feet long, just so you can get a sense of scale. And that's the terms and condition that's passing by the stages gallery, and it's in the center. And then here we are at the art case, the golden gallery at the end. So the first room is the terms and conditions. So you enter into this space, and you're walking in, you're walking through the museum, the SCAD Museum of Art, and you see this very bright, stark space, very cold and light temperature. It was very off-putting, I thought, for some people, and some people were just diving right in. But it had this sort of like glow to it as you're walking in. You walk in, and really this is an immersive contract. This was that the attendees have to sign before entering into our exhibition. And at first, this was something more of a functional nature, in which people would have to kind of say, yes, I know that the installation or the exhibition will take a photograph of me, and I am agreeing to these terms and conditions. But then we said, let's exaggerate the flaw and kind of make it a bit more hyperbolic and kind of expand up what is normally just a checkbox in like an Instagram or a social media experience, and have a contract between both the artist, us, and also the people going to view the work. So we'll just let this play. I'll let you go and talk a little bit about the contract and some of the copyright.
Right, so the environment in here is meant to be very sterile, kind of like when you get a freshly printed contract, and it's like white, and it's hot, and you're kind of like intimidated by it. And then we decided to make this add an element of performance, where we have a performer who is both functional, because he or she will help the audience participant navigate how to go through the space, but also conceptual, so wearing stark white clothing like this. And his performance directives were basically to be the embodiment of a contract. And he was very friendly to people, but very unhelpful, kind of like when you call and they're like, enter your PIN, and you say, I don't have my PIN, and they're like, enter your PIN, and they're really friendly, but they're just repeating
not
things
helpful.
and not helpful. It was kind of like that. He had great manners, but really didn't offer guests anything, and if they asked questions, would just repeat something that was already on the wall. So it's kind of a frustrating but kind of funny experience. And he was the embodiment of the contract, and he guided people in how to enter the rest of the space, and they had to agree to what was on the wall in order to make it to the next room.
And in here, you're agreeing that you would be the subject of the artwork of On View, and that we would be able to take your likeness as the artist and use it in the art. And here you sign by stepping on a rubber round. There we go. You sign by stepping on a rubber round. And this is basically, we have capacitive touch sensors and different sort of sensors throughout the space that allows you to interact. This isn't playing for some reason. But it was interesting because after we opened on view, I think like 2 weeks later, actually, sorry, I think you mentioned this, the Gothamist column first, and which that vessel kind of got, blown up about, an overreaching terms and conditions, which was just interesting because we had just opened a piece about this. And later they had, essentially you agree to the company to take your likeness, even though you're just consenting by taking the photo within that space. And they ended up changing their policies right after, but there's a really fun article of us talking about this in Surface Magazine that just came out like right after the vessel, because there was just that synchronicity, taking like sort of a sardonic look at selfie culture. Let's move into the stages gallery. So this is the second area in the piece.
Yeah, so you leave this really stark, bright white space. You've just agreed to something that you maybe don't understand, but maybe you do. And most people, I don't think, read the whole thing. This video is very helpful.
Is it possible to press play on this video? Yeah, perfect. Just let this play through. Thank you.
So this is the stages gallery, which is, yes, you leave this stark white contract, you just agree to something, and you enter into a space that's like the complete opposite. It has very black reflective walls. It's kind of maze-like. There's a very circular ambient score by Amon Tobin, who did the music for this space. And inside this room, there's also performers. And in a piece where the audience is supposed to be the subject of the work, and the audience is, in a sense, the performer of the work, then the role of the performer is very difficult to figure out. And what we decided on in order to have a kind of living embodiment of the walls via performance. So the performers were connected literally to the ceiling, to the walls, and they kind of were emerging in an atmospheric, choreographic kind of sequence of structured improvisation, and they were just kind of moving sculptures. And in the rehearsals for that, we had the performers go and try to distract some of the other performers in order to like tempt them to break character and have them hold it to really make sure that they were a presence in the room, but they weren't attached to the room in any way. And that was our way of kind of making them environmental performance instead of the performers as the subject of the work, because the whole point of the piece is the audience being the subject of the work. So they're more like moving architecture.
And as Ania said, there are 2 designated stages in which the exhibition photographs the audience members. And one of them is called Data Body, and the other one is called I Didn't Sign Up for This, kind of a throwback to the terms and condition, name of the contract, what you're signing up for. And in both of these stages, we have what we call predictive choreography, in which you can see both of these people are in a very specific position, and they have to be in that position specifically in order to have the installation photograph them. It also allows for that stage to come alive. So, if you walk in there and you are, for instance, trying to take your own photo, it won't activate the stage as well, so you don't really get that full opportunity. So it was a way that we could kind of take back a bit of control through predictive choreography. And the way that we controlled that was through the environmental sensors that we were talking about before. Go ahead, do you want to say something?
Yeah, so this was also our way of saying we're going to allow audiences to be the subject of the artwork. We'll say, okay, that works, but still you agreed in the contract at the beginning that you maybe read that we are still the artists. Therefore, if you're going to be the subject of our work, it has to be in alignment with something that we have designed. So we're saying yes, but on our terms, as a way to kind of also make a difference and highlight the difference between performance and performativity. So they were able to take a photo in this space that we designed, but they couldn't do it in a way that was performative and perform themselves in their daily life or their personal brands. If they wanted to have a photo in our space, they needed to stand in a specific way, looking a certain direction in a pose that was designed by us in order to make sure that the images that are produced in our installation are still ours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just so you can see, this is someone going through the experience in which, their hand is touching. This is like a piece of wood with a sensor behind it. So the environment is very physical. There's, kinetic winch control, there's light control, and you can see the flashing recording sign. And so what that's about is that it takes about 15 seconds for your photo to be taken. Once you lock into the right position, you hear a voice, which is actually Amon Tobin, but he doesn't sound how he normally sounds. We're actually going to play it for you with some of the soundtrack in this next clip, just so you can kind of get the vibe. But this is what you had to do in order for the photo to be taken. Right. So you would walk in the space, you would look at the red eye and put your body in the right position.
Hold the position. 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And then you would hear a snap. Yeah.
Then your photo's taken.
And Storm has heard this track probably 55,000 times a day. You're not in the gallery, don't worry. You're in New York. And what's interesting, so 15 seconds, we initially did that because we didn't know how long the winch choreography was going to take to go up, so we just had Amon count to 15 seconds. And then we were like, on opening night, we kind of like people are sitting there for 15 seconds. I mean...
Oh, you should, the 15 seconds, what happened in the 15 seconds? This is really good.
Yeah. So I didn't sign up for the stage. The one where you're sitting and you're looking at the eye. There's a pressure sensor in the seat. So, we can track whether you're in the right choreography or not. And so the counter started, hold a position, and then 15, 14. At like 13, I saw this woman. She held the position, but also held her phone out and started texting. There's two-way mirrors looking into the stages, so you can kind of like spy on people as they're doing this, and they don't really know that you're watching them hold this position for this long. And she's texting, and like clockwork, 3, 2, and she puts it down, 1. The photo takes, I was like, no way. I witnessed that whole thing. So the music, the soundtrack that you hear is what you hear in the Stages Gallery. That's the countdown that you hear. And it was important for us to have Amon record it because as we're talking about how our lives integrate with technology, a lot of our experience with technology is voice control, voice searches, voice feedback. So if you want to talk about, I guess, the man through a woman's voice.
Right, so we could have had a woman hold the position in the countdown, but the reason why we had Amon, a man, read the hold the position in the countdown and put it through a filter that made him sound like a woman is kind of an analogy for the way that oftentimes tech uses women's likenesses, names, voices, and qualities in order to make people kind of put their guards down more and make them feel more comfortable sharing. If you look at Siri, Alexa, most digital assistants, Google Assistant.
They're not
I even got
George.
an email from Bank of America from Erica, so now we have Erica too. But yeah, people I think would be less likely to put a machine in their house named George that was listening to all their conversations. But if you put Alexa, it seems like she's friendly and she wants to help you. So kind of this weird hijacking of
book your hair appointments.
Right, and book your hair appointments. This hijacking of women's likeness in order to make people share more. For more building of complete data bodies, as we were talking about earlier. So that was a kind of Easter egg in there of why we had a man speaking through a woman's voice for the countdown.
So the last section of the installation is called the Golden Gallery. So the Golden Gallery, so you've agreed to the terms and conditions in the terms and condition immersive contract. Then you've walked into the Stages Gallery, which is, a theoretical parallel to the selfie stage, in which you have 2 designated selfie stages that are that you're not in control of taking the photo, but the exhibition is photographing you, so I wouldn't call it a selfie stage, I'd call it a stage modeled off of that. You have your photo taken, and you go rock up to the Golden Gallery. The Golden Gallery looks like, you know, you kind of like rocked up to the Smithsonian or the Met. It's very much like a simulation of the sort of standard, you know, universal fine art experience, white walls, even lighting, and a fine art security guard. A lot of people thought that this was, you know, someone who worked at SCAD, Museum of Art, but actually they're a trained performer, you know. SCAD student, actually. Moses, he's lovely. Trained to kind of be bored and yawn and, you know, maybe fall asleep on duty.
Yeah, for this, we realized that if we're simulating the fine art look, that upon looking at every image and also attending, you always see someone standing next to the art looking bored, and it's almost like this weird hidden symbolic confirmation of the work that's next to it. And so we wanted to make sure that we included this also as a performance element. So we studied the choreography of fine art security guards and then made a kind of repertoire of positions and poses and actions that Moses would perform.
Yeah. And actually after, if you go there now, you can see there is a real authentic black smudge, you know, back behind where Moses is staying. That's, and we were talking about to the front of house, Chris, and he was like, you're gonna get the smudge. And we're like, really? We're gonna get the smudge? And we got the smudge. Like 2 weeks later, we got the smudge in the wall from the suit rubbing off. And them, just leaning like that. And just real quick, why is it called the Golden Gallery? The installation, the exhibition, was built off of the design system of the golden ratio. As we showed the example in the beginning of our current experience of art and the choreography of how we, you know, consume fine art, like the Mona Lisa or anything at the Louvre, along with other works of art that may be seen in a more commercial context or sort of like a hybrid context. You know, the Mona Lisa has kind of been like a reference, more as like a tongue-in-cheek reference, and that is built off of the golden ratio. So we're using this as a design system for even, you know, the dimensions of the frame. You know, there's a TV in there that's switching the photos, but we built the frame specifically. Everything was like a weird dimension. The fabricator was like, why is this 1, you know, 1 foot, 1 inch and 3/8 by 1, you know, foot 9 inch 3/4. Really like they're like, this is the craziest dimension. But that's why. And we also, the typographical grid systems were built off of the golden ratio. So you saw this theme built in, the size, the dimensions of the push plates, everything. The ramp, everything. So, but when you walk in as, you know, the guest experiences, you walk in, you know, at this point, you step on, you know, the rub around just like you did in the stage to activate the stages, as well as to activate the terms and condition to like let you in and agree to the contract. You do this here. You're looking at the art, and then there's this camera looking back at you, maybe keeping the art safe. Or Moses is keeping the art safe, and your image comes up at this point. So only your face can recall, you know, this image. So you can see, you know, this is the image of the performer or the audience member walking through. And these images aren't distributed anywhere. There's no like kind of QR code or like social media feed in which you can get it. Go ahead,
We were asked many times where people can get the photos, and as a way to kind of respond against the idea that you go to an art experience for a photo takeaway, we allowed the audience to be the subject of the art, but we did not distribute the images, so only we have the images, and if they wanted to see the images, they had to be in the gallery looking at themselves in the case, which resulted in this, which is also profoundly interesting with the selfie, with your reflection of a selfie looking at an image of yourself in the art case. So we love this outcome. This is really cool.
So how did the image come up in the art case? So we used both well, facial recognition is the short answer, but there's 2 steps. So there's facial detection. So when you're in the stages gallery and the installation is photographing you, there's a camera that's a DSLR that's taking the art photograph that you finally see in the space. And then there's this sort of, you remember that eye that you were looking at during the countdown? There's a camera within that, and that is our look at camera, and that's the facial recognition camera. So there's 2 phases. First, we use the Viola-Jones, HAR method, in which we detect a face, where we see it on our phones, where it puts the kind of square over our face, and as we move, the square follows our face around. So that is basically the first step, is detecting whether this image passes as a face or not. If it passes as a face, the next thing it does is it downsamples your face like this, and it takes a low-res image, because we're not finding, and this is the facial recognition, which is different than detection. Facial recognition, basically the way that we're doing it and how is largely done, is that you're not finding unique faces, you're finding differences between faces, and you can see that there's an array and a grid of faces with here, and it basically puts them on a spectrum and says, how different is this face from a different face? It's not saying, hey, that's Storm and that's Ania and this is Dejha, but it's saying, how different are we? And that's how facial recognition works, and that's how we did it here. So essentially, when you take the photo on the art case, when you see your photo, you're taking the photo in the stages gallery, and the facial recognition, camera encodes the data that it captures into the actual art image, and then we build a guest sort of profile in which, when you rock up to the art case, your face will pull up the most similar looking image to your face. And yeah, in general, beyond just facial recognition, there's the sensors. On View is kind of learning about you and knowing your presence and building your sort of data body as you're going through this experience. And I think this for us is very much a nod to ubiquitous computing, in which, the ultimate goal of a Mark Weiser from 1985 would be saying something like, okay, so the goal of technology or ubiquitous computing is that technology is inseparable from, the fabric of our everyday lives, and in the sense that it falls into the background, and we're not seeing screens, and we're not seeing, projectors, and we don't have to use clunky devices to and get carpal tunnel to move forward. We can just act as human and be more human. So the good thing about that is, we can spend less time looking at screens, but the bad thing about that is that we don't know that these environments are learning about us, simultaneously. So there is, some pros and cons there. And, On View really does kind of have that. Even when you're touching sensors, you're sitting on a cushion, you're touching wood, you're standing on rubber, but all of this is picking up information about you. So really, we just wanted to kind of bring that in, even conceptually, to the piece. Yeah.
Dejha one day was like, the best thing about ubiquitous computing is that it makes technology invisible. And the worst thing about ubiquitous computing is that it makes technology invisible. And I was like, yes. So that's kind of what we wanted to show here, is that we're becoming less and less aware of when we're being tracked and when we're being monitored and when our information is being distributed, when it's being sold. And that was kind of what we wanted to touch on with the design of this space. And then
hyperbole.
Yes, hyperbole. So basically, if you look at it, we were looking at the experience of art being in 3 phases. You agree, then you take a photo and share the photo, or you take a photo, and then you distribute the photo. So if you go back to the first one, we took the first moment of agreeing, which is usually a tiny checkbox on your phone, usually not very intimidating, and we blew up that moment of agreement, and we said, you need to come into this very white, very stark space with an intimidating person who is not helping you at all, and you need to stand in the center in order to agree. So we took the tiny moment and blew it up, and with scale made people realize the weight of kind of agreeing and what that means. A lot of people looked in the room and were like, I'm not going in there. So it's funny that very few people would have that response to agreeing to something online, but when they saw it in scale, it felt intimidating, as it should all the time. Next is the moment of capturing a photo. So the moment of going and seeing art, but standing in front of it and being the subject of the work. We took this as a huge exaggeration and created stages where it literally doesn't do anything until it has an audience member inside of it and activating it.
Very much like social media.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's very much like social media. It's an empty shell awaiting human energy in order to have any sort of function or purpose. And without it, it does nothing. So does this installation. So this is a moment of blowing that moment of capturing art to you are the center of the art with the stages. And then stage 3 is distributing that image or sharing that image, which we did in this way, where it was so precious that the image takeaway is put in a gold, inspired by 16th century frame, custom made in the golden ratio. Thank you, SCAD.
Thank you.
And put
It's
in
the most gorgeous frame.
It's really gorgeous. And then put in a fine art case and guarded by a fine art security guard to confirm visually the worth of that image of you in the art. So it's kind of one giant hyperbole if you look at the structure.
And I think the whole experience has this kind of we're calling it like experiential dark comedy or something. You know, there's just like there is this. It's a very serious matter, but there's also this like dark humor kind of happening. Moses sliding down. I think he's falling asleep here or something. Does he fall all the way?
Yes, he does.
Yeah. There he goes. There he goes.
This is the best.
Oh. Sleeping on the job.
So yeah, we're like, as dark comedy does, it's a serious subject, but it's approach, and we really didn't mean it to be funny at all, but we found that along the way there were several, like with the moments of exaggeration become a bit comedic, which we welcome.
So, before we get into Q&A, I mean, how do we sum this up, and how do we, what did we accomplish, or what questions do we still have?
Yeah. So, thinking about what happened and making this and starting off being like, why does everyone want to take selfies in our work? And then getting all of a sudden into data brokering and more serious subjects and the layers behind the phenomenon that we initially were interested in. After that huge journey, we're kind of left with more questions than answers, which is mostly, what does it mean to engage with art today? Is photographing art a form of engagement with art? Is photographing art getting in the way of experiencing art? We read recently in this book that someone was saying, if you have a birthday party and you have a digital birthday party.
Goodbye World.
Oh, Goodbye World. I think someone mentioned this book earlier in another panel. It's really good. But what was I saying?
So if
you have a digital birthday party, then you're more likely to have people be present at your birthday party because they're with you mentally, even though they're not with you physically. Whereas if you have an in-person birthday party, people might be in digital space mentally and then not physically, and then not mentally with you. So we are thinking about this in the art context and in relation to this piece.
Are you more present when you're looking at art on a phone?
Right. Are you more present looking at a picture of art on Instagram than you are seeing it in the museum? Because if you're looking at it on Instagram, you're not wondering if you're getting your photo taken or if that moment of you looking at the art is being captured and it doesn't do anything versus being somewhere else. You have this kind of distraction or tendency to feel like that experience needs to be documented. So we're left with a lot of questions. And this idea of taking photos of non-experiences. So instead of having experiences, you're getting photos that look like experiences in lieu of those moments actually happening. And our final note was, it used to be pics or it didn't happen, and we're kind of joking lately that it should be no pics or it didn't happen. And that's it.